My name is Emily Thompson. I am 32 years old, and until the night this story began, I thought I had finally made peace with the role my family had given me. I was the dependable one, the one with the stable career in Seattle, the downtown apartment, the color-coded calendar, the kind of life people point to when they say, "She is doing just fine." That was exactly why they thought I would swallow what happened next with a polite smile. It was supposed to be a simple family barbecue at the house across the lake, the kind where the grill is too hot, the lemonade is too sweet, and everyone acts normal just long enough to lure you into letting your guard down. I remember the sound of silverware against porcelain, the smell of smoke in the backyard, and the way my father rested his palm on a stack of papers like he had been waiting all evening for his little performance. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't expect a dime from me." Not one person at that table looked surprised. That was the part that hit harder than the words. They had all known. They had all let me sit there smiling like a fool while they passed me a plate and waited for the knife to go in. I could have cried. I could have begged. I could have reminded them of every bill I had quietly covered and every mess I had helped clean up. Instead, I smiled back. I set my fork down carefully, then my knife, and I said, "All right, then don't expect a single cent from me either." You know that kind of silence that feels louder than screaming. That was the silence I left behind when I stood up from the table. What I did not know yet was that those 8 calm words were about to tear the whole family apart, and only weeks later, the same man who tried to cut me off with a smile would be standing in front of me, looking like his world was ending. Before I tell you exactly what happened after I walked out that night, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now, because I have a feeling this story is going to travel a lot farther than that backyard ever expected. The drive back to Seattle felt longer than it ever had before. The sky was already turning dark over the water, and every red brake light in front of me looked blurred at the edges, like my eyes were refusing to focus on anything too clearly. I kept replaying that moment at the table in my head. Not just the sentence, not just the way he said it. It was the expression on his face that wouldn't leave me alone. Calm, certain, almost relieved. Like he had been waiting a long time to finally say out loud what everyone else in that family had quietly believed for years. That I was useful, but not precious. Reliable, but not loved the way the others were loved. It should have broken me more than it did. Maybe it would have if that night had been the first betrayal. But it wasn't. It was just the first time they had been arrogant enough to stop hiding it. By the time I pulled into the garage under my building, my hands had stopped shaking. By the time the elevator doors closed, something colder had taken the place of hurt. Not rage. Not yet. Just clarity. I walked into my apartment, kicked off my heels, set my keys on the kitchen counter, and stood there in the silence for a long minute. Nobody was waiting for me. Nobody was calling to apologize. Nobody was going to run after me and say they had gone too far. I poured myself a glass of California Red, the one I had been saving for a better night, and I sat at my kitchen island with my phone in one hand and my laptop open in front of me. For a few seconds, I just stared at my banking app like I was looking at evidence from someone else's life. There it all was, lined up neatly like a second family budget hidden inside mine. $2,000 every month toward the business debt my father never fully recovered from after his construction company started sinking. Another recurring transfer for my brother's car payment and insurance. Another for my sister's rent gap and the little emergencies that somehow kept happening every single month. Then there were the extra payments no one ever saw because they were never officially labeled anything important. Property tax when my parents came up short. Repairs after a pipe burst in the downstairs bathroom. A roof patch one winter. The contractor deposit for a remodel they told neighbors they had finally managed on their own. 5 years of quiet money moving out of my life and into theirs, and somehow I was still the selfish one. I took a sip of wine, opened the transfer settings, and hovered over the cancel button. I thought I might hesitate. I thought years of conditioning would rise up inside me and whisper that I was overreacting, that I was emotional, that family made mistakes, and good daughters absorbed them. But all I could hear was his voice. Don't expect a dime from me. So I whispered back to the empty room, fine. And then I canceled every single one. One after another. The business debt, the car, the rent support, the backup household transfer I had left there for unexpected family needs. Every confirmation screen felt strangely small for something that had controlled so much of my adult life. When the last one disappeared, I leaned back in my chair and waited for guilt to hit me like a truck. It did not. What came first was grief. Heavy, humiliating grief. Not because I missed the money, but because the truth finally sat in front of me without makeup on. I had not been helping build a loving family. I had been financing a system where everyone else got to stay comfortable while I earned the right to be tolerated. I cried then, quietly and without drama, my face in my hands, my wine glass untouched beside me. But somewhere underneath the hurt, another feeling was growing. It was unfamiliar enough to scare me a little. Relief. Real relief. The kind that loosens something in your chest you did not realize had been tight for years. I went to bed just before 2 in the morning, but I barely slept. I kept waking up expecting a call, a text, some apology, some explosion. 48 hours later, I got exactly what I should have expected. Not remorse, not understanding, just outrage. And that was when I finally saw what my family really thought of me. The first voicemail came from my mother at 7:12 on a Monday morning, right as I was walking into the office with coffee in one hand and my laptop bag sliding off my shoulder. Her voice was clipped and offended, like she was the one who had been publicly humiliated. Emily, I do not know what game you think you are playing, but your father got a call from the bank, and Ethan says his payment did not go through. Call me back immediately. There was no, are you all right? No. We should talk. No. Maybe your father went too far. Just immediate panic over missing money. I listened to it once, deleted it, and went into my first meeting of the day like my chest was not burning. By lunch, there were 4 more. My brother sounded angry before he sounded scared. My sister sounded insulted. My father left the shortest message of all. Fix this. That was it. 2 words. Like I was an employee who had made an error in payroll. I did not respond. By that evening, the texts had started. My mother said I was being dramatic. My brother said I was punishing everyone over one conversation. My sister said this was exactly why nobody could ever talk to me honestly. That one actually made me laugh out loud in my apartment, alone, with my phone lighting up like an emergency beacon on the couch beside me. Nobody could talk to me honestly. That was rich. Coming from the people who had sat through an entire barbecue pretending it was a normal family dinner before announcing I was worth nothing to them the second dessert plates were cleared. I blocked them all before bed, not because I was weak, because I already knew the pattern. First came anger, then guilt, then the great American classic of manipulative families everywhere. After everything we have done for you. 3 weeks passed. At first, I kept waiting for someone to show up at my building or send flowers or try sincerity for once. Instead, all I got was silence. Deep, ugly silence. I worked longer hours than usual. I threw myself into a product launch that should have stressed me out, but actually felt simple compared to my personal life. At night, I ran along the waterfront until my legs hurt. It was easier to exhaust my body than to quiet my mind. I almost started believing the worst had passed. Then on a Friday afternoon, while I was reviewing project timelines, a text came through from an unknown number. Family meeting tonight. You owe us this. I stared at the screen for a long time. The wording alone told me everything. Not, please come. Not, can we talk? You owe us this. Like access to me was still part of their package plan. I should have ignored it. I know that. But some raw, foolish part of me still wanted one thing I had been chasing my whole life from them. A fair moment. One honest conversation where they heard me without twisting the room around their needs. So I drove back to Bellevue that night. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Warm porch light, trim lawn. A place that still gave the illusion of stability to anyone who did not know who had been paying to keep it that way. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. Her smile was thin and nervous. She stepped aside like she was doing me a favor by letting me enter. When I walked into the living room, I stopped short. My Aunt Susan was there, sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch with both hands wrapped around a mug she clearly had no interest in drinking from. I had not expected her. Neither had they, judging by the tension in the room. My father was standing near the fireplace with his arms crossed. My brother and sister were on the sofa like a jury that had already reached a verdict. Nobody offered me a seat, so I took one anyway. My father began the way men like him always begin when they think they are still in control. Calm tone, measured words. Emily, we need to clear the air. Your mother and I think this has gone on long enough. I looked at him. Has what gone on long enough? My brother jumped in before he could answer. This tantrum. You cutting off money like that. You know Dad is behind. You know I needed that payment to clear. I turned to him slowly. Tantrum. That was the word he chose for the end of 5 years of financial support, after I was told not to expect a dime from my own father. My sister let out a breath through her nose, already irritated that I was making them work for it. Mom was just being honest, she said. Dad was just trying to be transparent. You are successful, Emily. You live in Seattle. You have a great job. You are fine. Some of us are still figuring things out. There it was. The family religion. My competence had always been the excuse for their cruelty. Because I was capable, I was supposedly less deserving of care. Because I managed my life well, I was expected to carry theirs too. My mother finally spoke, soft and tired, performing reason for the room. You are the oldest. You have always been strong. Ethan and Olivia still need more support. That does not mean we do not love you. I almost smiled at how perfectly she framed it. Not as exploitation, as love with uneven distribution. My Aunt Susan shifted in her seat and glanced at me with something close to worry. So I did what I should have done years ago. I stopped trying to argue feelings, and I started listing facts. I told them the exact amount I had paid toward my father's business debt. I named the months, the transfers, the repairs, the property tax bill I covered when they were a little short 2 winters ago. I looked directly at my brother and reminded him who had paid the down payment on the car he still drove. I looked at my sister and mentioned the rent extensions, the missed credit card minimums, the emergency cash I sent her when she decided 2 different jobs were beneath her in the same year. Nobody interrupted for the first minute. Then everybody started at once. My mother said I was keeping score. My brother said none of that had been forced on me. My sister said throwing money around did not buy emotional blackmail rights. My father's face changed as the room slipped out of his control. His voice dropped lower, harder. If you came here to shame us, you can leave. I stood up. That was the first thing he had said all night that made sense. My Aunt Susan rose halfway too, like she was thinking about following me. I picked up my bag and looked at the 4 of them. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just said what should have been obvious to any decent person in that room. You do not get to tell me I matter less, and then demand I keep financing the people you value more. My father took 1 step toward me, his jaw tight. If you walk out that door tonight, do not expect to come back. I was already turning the knob when I answered. I have not felt welcome here in years. I walked out into the cold, and for a second I just stood on that front step, looking at the house I had helped repair, helped maintain, helped protect from consequences that should have arrived much sooner. Then I got in my car and drove away for the second time. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Because when people lose control over the person they depended on, they do not always let go quietly. Sometimes they decide to punish you first. The rumors started small, which somehow made them meaner. Big lies are dramatic. Small lies are strategic. They slip into family conversations and neighborhood gossip without sounding theatrical enough to challenge. An old cousin I barely spoke to texted me one Sunday afternoon and asked if I was okay. When I asked why, she sent me a screenshot from the extended family group chat. My sister had written that I had cut everyone off overnight after my father made one harmless comment about estate planning. My brother followed it with something about how success had changed me and made me ashamed of where I came from. Two older relatives chimed in with versions of, "Maybe she is under stress," and "We should pray for her heart." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because I finally understood their next move. If they could not guilt me privately, they would recast me publicly. The funny thing was, they still underestimated me. They thought I would explode. They thought I would jump into the chat and defend myself emotionally, sentence by sentence, and give them fresh material to twist. Instead, I took screenshots. Every message, every vague post, every little performance. My brother put up a story one afternoon that said, "Funny how some people get rich and forget who kept them grounded." My sister reposted something about selfish daughters who abandon the people who raised them. My mother, who had always preferred the image of dignity over open mess, did not post anything directly, but one of her friends called Aunt Susan to say Karen was heartbroken because Emily had suddenly stopped helping after everything her parents had sacrificed. Sacrificed. I had to set my phone down before I laughed too hard. Aunt Susan called me that evening and asked, gently, if any of what they were saying was true. I told her everything. Not angrily, not theatrically, just the truth. The years of payments, the dinner, the meeting, the threats, the block list, the bank. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said very softly, "I knew they leaned on you. I did not know it was this bad." I thanked her for listening and let the silence sit there for a second. It felt good, in a strange way, to say the facts out loud to someone who was not already committed to misreading me. At work, I told no one. I kept showing up, hitting deadlines, managing team conflict, presenting updates, all while my family tried to reduce me to a villain in the background of my own life. That was the week my division head pulled me into a conference room to tell me a major client rollout was ahead of schedule because of my leadership. I remember nodding and thanking him, and walking back to my desk thinking how absurd it was that strangers could see my value more clearly than the people who shared my last name. A few days later, Seattle gave us one of those gray afternoons that makes the whole city look like it was sketched in pencil. I had just come down to the lobby to grab a delivery when I saw him, my father. He was standing near the security desk in a jacket I had seen him wear 100 times, except now it looked too big on him somehow. He did not wave when he saw me. He just straightened up, like dignity was something he was trying to pull back over his shoulders at the last second. For one ridiculous moment, I thought maybe he had come to apologize. Maybe desperation had finally cracked open some honesty, but the second I got close enough to see his face, I knew better. He looked terrified, yes, but not ashamed. Terrified people can still be proud. He stepped toward me and lowered his voice. "Emily, we need to talk." I glanced at the security desk, then back at him. "You have 30 seconds. His face tightened at that, but he pressed on. The bank is coming after the house. We are behind. They are talking about legal action. I said nothing. He swallowed hard. You cannot do this. It was almost word for word what I had imagined hearing since the night of that barbecue, and somehow it was still worse in person. Not because he was begging, because even now, he still framed me as the cause of the problem instead of the absence of the solution. I looked at him for a long moment, then I asked the one question I had earned. Do what? He exhaled sharply, already frustrated that I was not making this easier. Stop punishing us. Help us get through this rough patch, and we can all move on. I actually smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. You mean the same way you moved on when you looked me in the eye and told me not to expect a dime from you. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. Emily, that was about the will. This is different. No, I said. It is exactly the same. That sentence landed, but not the way it should have. I could see him deciding, in real time, that humility was not working and pressure might. He lowered his voice even more. If this gets out, it humiliates your mother, your siblings, the whole family. I leaned in just enough to make sure he heard me clearly. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you treated me like an ATM with a pulse. I walked away before he could answer. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat by the time I got into the elevator. When the doors closed, I looked at my own reflection and realized something had changed for good. I was done protecting people who would destroy me to save their own image. And once that decision settled inside me, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. That night, I sat on my couch with my laptop open and every screenshot, transfer receipt, bank record, and email thread I had saved over the years spread across my coffee table like the paperwork version of a nervous breakdown. Only this was not a breakdown. It was an audit. A final one. I kept hearing my father in the lobby saying, "If this gets out, it humiliates the whole family." What he meant was, if people know the truth, we lose control of the story. For years, I had protected them with silence. I had told myself it was maturity, privacy, loyalty. But silence is only noble when the people you are protecting are not actively weaponizing it against you. Mine were. They had already started the smear campaign. They had already decided I was greedy, unstable, ungrateful, cold. All I was really choosing now was whether I would keep letting them narrate my life. Around midnight, I started typing. I did not write a rant. I did not insult anyone. I did not call them monsters or narcissists, or use any of the language people reach for when they want instant sympathy online. I wrote exactly what happened. I wrote that after years of quietly helping with family debt, bills, repairs, and support, I had been told at a family gathering not to expect a dime from my own father. I wrote that after that, I stopped the monthly financial transfers I had been making for years. I wrote that those payments included business debt, living support, and costs my family had allowed others to believe they were covering on their own. I attached dates, I attached amounts, I attached cropped screenshots of recurring transfers with identifying account numbers hidden. I included repair invoices, property tax confirmation, and one message from my brother thanking me for making the car payment last year so his account would not overdraft. At the end, I wrote the only emotional sentence in the whole post. I never wanted public sympathy. I wanted private respect. Since I could not get that, I am choosing honesty. Then I tagged Aunt Susan. Not to drag her into chaos, but because by then she had already told me she was willing to stand by the truth if anyone tried to deny it. I read the post 4 times before hitting publish. My finger hovered over the trackpad. A part of me still hated this. Not because it was wrong, but because decent people hate being dragged into public mess, even when the mess was built around them. Then I thought about my father standing in my office lobby, not apologizing, not asking how I was, just warning me not to embarrass him. And I clicked. Nothing happened for the first minute. Then the notification started. 1 like, then 3, then comments, then shares. A woman from my parents' neighborhood wrote that she was shocked and sorry. A cousin in Arizona said she had no idea. Someone else wrote, "This is why you should never judge the child who finally says enough." Of course, not everyone took my side. One older relative commented that family matters should remain private. Another said money should never come before blood. I almost responded to that one, but I did not need to. Aunt Susan did it for me. She wrote, "As someone who knows the details, I can confirm Emily has supported this family quietly for years. She is not lying. That changed everything." Once there was an adult witness willing to stand publicly with me, the tone of the conversation shifted. My mother called within 10 minutes. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was shaking with fury so hard it almost sounded like grief. "How dare you? How dare you humiliate us like this?" I stood up and walked to the window while she spoke, watching Seattle lights blur in the glass. "You already humiliated me, Mom. Publicly would have been at the barbecue. I kept it private until you all decided to lie about me." "We did not lie," she snapped. "You abandoned your family." I laughed then, once, quietly. "No. I stopped financing adults who made it clear I mattered less than the people spending my money." She gasped like I had slapped her. "Your father is sick with stress. Your brother is falling behind. Olivia is a mess. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "Yes," I said. I finally stopped rescuing people who only loved me when the transfer cleared. She went silent at that, the kind of silence people fall into when the script stops working. Then she whispered, "You have destroyed this family." I closed my eyes and answered with more calm than I felt. "No, I just stopped being the glue after all of you spent years pulling me apart." I hung up before she could reply. My brother texted minutes later. "Hope you are proud of yourself. People are calling Dad a fraud." My sister followed with, "You always wanted everyone to see us as losers next to you." That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it showed how deeply she needed to believe that anyone who set boundaries must be motivated by cruelty. I did not answer either of them. I just watched the post keep spreading. Not viral, not national, not dramatic in that ridiculous internet way. But far enough. Through the family network, through the Bellevue neighborhood, through old family friends who suddenly had context for years of polished half-truths. The next day at work, I kept my phone face down during meetings. By lunchtime, I had 7 missed calls, 12 messages, and 2 private notes from distant relatives saying some version of "I wish I had known." It did not feel like victory, exactly. It felt like standing in the aftermath of a building collapse and realizing you had not started the fire, but you were done pretending the smoke was normal. That afternoon, as I was leaving the office, my father called. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. He did not greet me. He just said, "Was this really necessary?" I got into the elevator before replying. Was telling me I was worth nothing really necessary. He exhaled hard, tired now instead of angry. "You have made things much worse." "For who?" I asked. "The people who lied." The elevator doors opened on the garage level. He did not answer right away. Then he said something that told me more about him than all the years before combined. "You could have handled this with more grace." I actually stopped walking. Grace. That word sat there between us like an insult wearing a tie. I thought about every quiet payment, every swallowed hurt, every time I had cleaned up their consequences without forcing them to look at what they had become. Grace was all I had ever given them. So I said the truest thing I had said yet. "Grace is what I gave you for 5 years. Boundaries are what you are getting now." Then I ended the call. After that, the noise slowly changed shape. The anger did not disappear, but it lost its confidence. People had receipts now. They had timelines. They had names and numbers and context. My family could still hate me, but they could no longer convincingly pretend I had ruined them out of nowhere. The truth had done what truth always does when it finally gets enough air. It made denial more expensive. And once that happened, the collapse I had delayed for years started moving faster than any of them were ready for. 6 months later, the drama had cooled, but the consequences had not. They had just settled into ordinary life, which in some ways was a harsher punishment than one explosive ending. Public embarrassment fades. Bills do not. The updates came mostly through Aunt Susan, never in a gossipy tone, just the quiet, matter-of-fact way decent people speak when they know you need information without poison. My father sold off what was left of the company he had spent years pretending was just one good contract away from bouncing back. It did not bounce back. It folded in the slow, undignified way small businesses sometimes do when pride has been running the books longer than math. He took a job doing basic mechanical work and maintenance for a local shop outside Bellevue. Nothing glamorous. Long hours, less money, more supervision from men younger than him. My mother started opening a coffee shop at 5 in the morning 3 days a week, then picked up more shifts when it became obvious no one was sweeping in to save them. According to Susan, she was exhausted and furious in equal measure, which sounded exactly right. My brother abandoned his startup idea after 3 different friends stopped pretending it had investors around the corner. He ended up in warehouse logistics, loading, scanning, lifting, learning that money moves differently when you actually earn it by the hour. My sister, after months of insisting she was building a personal brand, finally took a serving job at a busy restaurant in Kirkland. The first time Susan mentioned it, she sounded almost sad for her. I was not. Not because I wanted Olivia miserable, but because reality was the one thing nobody in that house had allowed her to meet on time. It had arrived late, but at least it arrived. The extended family had divided in predictable ways. Some still thought I should have stayed silent no matter what. Those people, I noticed, were always the ones who benefited most from women performing endurance in the name of harmony. Others stopped speaking to my parents altogether after the post and the receipts, not because they were scandalized by money, but because they recognized the pattern. The golden children, the responsible daughter, the endless expectation. It was more common than anyone liked to admit. Meanwhile, my own life did something that still felt strange when I looked at it directly. It opened. Without the monthly transfers, I finally saw what my own income actually looked like when it belonged to me. I maxed out savings accounts that had stayed half-fed for years. I renovated my apartment the way I wanted, not the way other people needed. I replaced my old couch. I booked a trip to Hawaii without hearing anybody's crisis in the back of my mind every time I hit confirm. Work changed too. The major project I had practically buried myself in during the worst of the family fallout ended up being a success, and by late summer I got promoted. Bigger title, bigger pay, more responsibility, yes, but this time it felt like growth instead of compensation for being overly capable in every room I entered. On my first morning with the new title in my inbox, I made coffee in my own kitchen, looked out over Seattle, and realized I had gone almost 2 full days without thinking about whether someone from my family needed something from me. That was how healing came, at least for me. Not in one cinematic moment, in small stretches of peace I did not have to earn. Hawaii was the first time I had traveled alone and actually enjoyed the solitude instead of treating it like evidence that I had failed at relationships. I swam, read, slept late, and sat by the water with no one expecting me to solve anything bigger than what I wanted for lunch. When I came home, I joined a local running group because I was tired of spending all my free time either working or recovering from working. That is where I met Mark. Not in some dramatic way. No spilled coffee, no perfect movie line. Just a Saturday morning run, light rain, and a man with an easy smile who matched my pace without trying to take over the conversation. We started talking after the runs, then grabbing coffee, then texting about ordinary things that felt extraordinary to me, only because nothing in them was manipulative. He never made me feel like affection was a task or support was a transaction. One night in early December, Aunt Susan came by with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat at my kitchen table while rain tapped softly against the windows, and after a while she looked at me with that steady, thoughtful face of hers and said, "You know they still blame you." I shrugged. I assumed they would. She nodded slowly. But more people see the truth now than they used to. They do not get the sympathy they thought they would. I looked down at my glass for a second. That should have felt satisfying, and part of me guessed it did. But mostly it felt tired, like hearing about weather in a town you no longer lived in. Susan must have seen something on my face because she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did not ruin them, Emily. You just stopped carrying them." That sentence stayed with me after she left. It might have been the cleanest summary of the whole story. I had spent so long being told that my refusal to keep sacrificing myself was violence, that I almost forgot an adult can collapse under the weight of their own choices without anybody pushing. By Christmas season, I was not healed in some perfect, glossy way. There were still moments that hurt. Passing families in matching sweaters downtown. Hearing a father laugh with his daughter in a grocery store. Catching myself almost reaching for my phone when something good happened. But the pain had changed texture. It no longer felt like an open wound. More like a scar I had stopped hiding under long sleeves. And as the year came to a close, I realized something that would have sounded impossible to the version of me who left that barbecue table. The worst thing my family ever did to me had also forced the best thing that ever happened to me. It taught me how to stop confusing love with access. On Christmas Eve, I hosted my own dinner for the first time in my life. Not because I was trying to prove anything, and not because I wanted some perfect replacement for the family I had lost. I did it because I finally understood that peace grows faster when you stop waiting for people who hurt you to become the ones who heal you. My apartment looked warm in a way I had never really let it before. There were candles on the table, a small tree in the corner, music playing low enough that people could actually talk, and trays of food that did not come with a side of obligation. Aunt Susan arrived first, carrying dessert and wearing the kind of smile that made the room feel steadier. A few close friends came after that. Mark showed up with a bottle of wine and a joke bad enough to make everyone laugh harder than it deserved. At one point, while people were talking in the living room and someone was helping in the kitchen, I stepped over to the window and looked out at the Seattle lights. The city looked soft and sharp at the same time, like it always does in winter. For a few seconds, I just stood there with my hands around a warm mug and let myself feel everything without running from any of it. The sadness was still there. I will not lie about that. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from realizing the people who were supposed to love you most were often most comfortable when you were overgiving, overworking, over-explaining, and emotionally starving. You do not just get over that because life improves. But something else was there too, stronger than the grief and quieter than revenge. Self-respect. The kind that does not scream. The kind that changes the way you stand in a room. I thought about that barbecue, about the will, about the silence that followed my father's sentence, about my own voice when I answered him. At the time, I thought I was ending something. Looking back, I was beginning something. I was beginning a life where love no longer required self-betrayal, a life where financial help, if I ever chose to give it again, would be a gift instead of a tax for being the responsible one. A life where being a good daughter, sister, partner, or friend would never again mean making myself smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. That, to me, is the real lesson in all of this. And I think it matters far beyond one family in one house in Bellevue. A lot of people are taught that love means endurance, that if you are strong, you should carry more, that if you are successful, you should never complain when others treat your stability like community property, that if you say no, you are cold. If you protect your peace, you are selfish. If you stop funding dysfunction, you are cruel. I do not believe that anymore. I think one of the most valuable things any person can learn is the difference between generosity and self-erasure. Helping the people you love can be beautiful. But when your help is expected, demanded, manipulated, and then used to measure your worth, it stops being love. It becomes control dressed up as family duty. And that is a lesson people need to hear, because too many good, capable, empathetic people end up trapped in roles they never consciously chose. They become the fixer, the saver, the one who always understands, the one who pays, the one who absorbs the emotional impact so everybody else can avoid growing up. If that is you, I want to say something clearly. Choosing yourself is not a moral failure. Setting financial boundaries is not betrayal. Saying no to people who only value your usefulness is not selfishness. It is wisdom. It is maturity. It is self-respect. It is how cycles of emotional and financial exploitation finally end. My family used to think the greatest threat in that house was me walking away. They were wrong. The greatest threat was the truth. The truth that I had carried them for years. The truth that they confused my loyalty with obligation. The truth that some people only panic when the person they took for granted realizes they are free to leave. I do not hate them. I really do not. Hate keeps you tied to people in its own way. What I feel now is something cleaner: distance, understanding, boundaries, and maybe the strongest kind of closure there is, the kind that does not require the other side to apologize before you move on. Behind me, I heard laughter from the table and Susan calling my name because somebody needed help slicing dessert. I took one last look at the city, smiled to myself, and turned back toward the people in my apartment. The people who were there because they wanted to be, not because they needed something from me. Maybe that is what family really is. Not blood, not history, not guilt. Just the people who can see your value without first calculating what they can take from it. So that is my story. My father looked me in the eye and told me not to expect a dime from him. What he did not realize was that the moment he said it, he also gave me permission to stop being the invisible ATM in everyone else's life. And in the end, the greatest gift I got from that whole brutal mess was not revenge, it was freedom. Now I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have kept giving until there was nothing left of you? Or would you have done what I did and finally said no? And if you have ever lived through something like this yourself, share your story in the comments, because I know I cannot be the only one who had to learn the hard way that love without respect is not love at all.